AM radio, an op-ed column, and Fox News is not enough. I want a center-right nation to fight for its soul, and its soul is represented in the arts. Its soul is represented in a world in which media is everything. AM radio is the lowest form of communication. It's tinny, it's not robust, it's not Avatar. I want Avatar. I want the right to enter the world of media to the extent and invest in media the way that the left does.
The fake media is trying to silence us, but we will not let them, because the people know the truth. The fake media tried to stop us from going to the White House, but I'm president and they're not.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast, a Breitbart.com podcast. The podcast starts now. Here's Curt with today's headlines.
Hey guys, welcome to Curt Schilling Podcast. I'm going to get right to the sound stuff today. Yesterday, we had basically the verbal equivalent of a cage match on Capitol Hill, and somebody got their ass kicked, and it wasn't who liberals thought it was. I got to tell you that the post sound bites are every bit as laughable, funny, and entertaining as the actual hearing was. And if you walked away from that hearing or watched any of it and said, you know what, I can trust Peter Strzok, you're a complete idiot. So Representative Swalwell from California, who is basically, in my mind, he is kind of Adam Schiff Jr. now. Every time he opens his mouth, he says something more stupid than the last time, which is hard to do considering the level of stupid he's come out with. But I want you to listen to talking to Anderson Cooper on CNN yesterday about if he was running the FBI, what he would do with Peter Strzok.
I actually, right after the 2016 election, wrote bipartisan legislation to have an independent commission. I foresaw then that this was going to become too hot for Congress and that we should put these issues in the hands of elders and state persons. And it's not too late to do that. The 9/11 Commission didn't get launched until well over a year after the attacks. I think this demonstrated today why we need an independent commission.
I mean, anyone watching today's hearing saw something that was, I mean, it was certainly contentious. It was personal, or at times seemed arguably out of control. Was anything actually accomplished today?
No, and actually, for the 2,000 children who would like to be with their parents tonight, nothing was accomplished as far as connecting them. And this is the committee that has jurisdiction to reconnect and reunite those families. I think that's why this was such a shame. However, I do think you have now seen that Director Comey, he came to Congress, raised his right hand, went under oath with respect to Russia. Peter Strzok has done the same thing. Two individuals the president continues to attack. So the question now moves, Mr. President, are you willing to go to Bob Mueller, raise your right hand, and go under oath and answer questions as it relates to your involvement with the Russians?
Okay, that's not the question. That's not the question at all. The question has nothing to do with Steve Bannon or President Trump. The question has to do with this agent, FBI agent, who clearly admitted that he has personal bias, which we all have, and tried to tell us that he was the only person in history whose bias didn't affect his decision-making process, and expected us to believe it. It was just, and the Democrats, I mean, they crapped all over themselves time, and they could not stand up quick enough to defend this traitor, and it just tells you who they are. Anyway, it gets even better. The repulsive stories coming out about Jim Jordan. By the way, 15 Ohio State wrestlers came out and said Jim Jordan absolutely wasn't involved in anything. He didn't know anything. He was exactly who you think he is. He's an honorable man and all the things that go with that. As they try to destroy him because he's going to be the next speaker. Listen to Nancy Pelosi, and every time this woman opens her mouth, I hear nails on the chalkboard. But listen up.
It's heartbreaking. It's devastating for so many young people who were suffered for years with the emotional pain of all of this. It's very sad. Commend those who've come forward and brought their personal pain into the public so that there can be an investigation, as there should be, and so that young people who play in sports can be protected. All sports. We've seen this across the board. Jim Jordan had a duty to protect them. They say he failed. These people who are accusing said he failed. Rather than deny and dismiss them, he should fully cooperate with the investigation. That's what I think he should do.
Does Congress, you think, have a role in doing it their own?
At some point, we'll just see how this goes forward. But I think that I think the people who came forward thought that he would cooperate in the investigation. I don't think it came forward as a charge against him. It came forward as a statement of fact, which he is denying that he had any knowledge of. He is a person who has always said everybody, oh my gosh, you look at his record. So-and-so should have known this, so-and-so should have known that, so-and-so should have known that. Well, many people say that he did know, and by his own standard, he should have known.
No, that's not what many people say, but you keep trying. And by the way, back to the earlier Swalwell soundbite, if you can't handle the congressional hearing, get out. Let somebody else do it. He wants to go to an independent committee. Why can't you guys do it? Because you can't handle a TV camera being on without trying to raise funds or get votes instead of just doing the job you were elected to do. One of the most contentious exchanges yesterday was with and by Louis Gohmert with Agent Strzok. The challenge is that if you're going to talk about infidelity and its place here, as someone who voted for President Trump, you better be, and I'm fine admitting the guy cheated on his wife. I think he cheated on more than one wife. But the fact of the matter is he has led me to believe since the day he was elected that he was going to keep his promises, and he's done it. So actions speak louder than words. In a lot of ways, that's exactly who Donald Trump is. A lot of the things he says are just white noise. He actually does and has done everything he promised he would do, and he's trying to get everything else done. Anyway, Agent Strzok was in the middle of an investigation in which he came to conclusions and resolutions prior to interviewing any of the witnesses, which is, I think, the textbook definition of bias. But listen to Representative Gohmert get after Agent Strzok, and listen to the liberals in the room when their heads explode.
And let me tell you, when you have text messages, Mr. Strzok, the way you do, saying the things you did, you'd been better off coming in here and say, look, that was my bias. And you kind of get around to that a little bit when you say, hey, everybody's got political views. Those are called biases, and we all have them. And you have come in here and said, I had no bias. And you do it with a straight face. And I watched you in the private testimony you gave. And I told some of the other guys, he is really good. He's lying. He knows, we know he's lying. And he could probably pass a polygraph. It's amazing.
Mr. Chairman.
No, this is my
Mr.
time.
Chairman, I'm sorry.
It needs to
point
be
of order.
paused.
This point of order.
No.
The gentleman will state his point of order.
A member of this committee just asserted that this witness, who is under oath and a former agent of the FBI, lied. There is no evidence of that. I ask him to withdraw it.
I do not withdraw it. He is not a member of Congress. It's not a violation of the rule. And just as you have been expressing bias through your members about what a hero
there is not a single person on this committee who has ever characterized a witness
gentleman
as
from
lying.
Rhode Island.
Gentleman,
it's my time.
That's a disgrace.
Gentleman from Rhode Island will suspend.
Him. No, the disgrace
Mr.
is what this man has done.
The gentleman from
justice
Texas will suspend for a moment.
There is the disgrace. And it won't be recaptured anytime soon because of the damage you've done to the justice system. And I've talked to FBI agents around the country. You've embarrassed them. You've embarrassed yourself. And I can't help but wonder when I see you looking there with a little smirk, how many times did you look so innocent into your wife's eye and lie to her about Lisa?
Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous.
The credibility of a witness
Shame
is
on
always
you,
an
Mr.
issue.
Mr. Chairman, please, there's
Have you
Mr. Chairman, this is intolerable harassment of the witness.
What's wrong with that? You need your medication.
Oh, my God. Did you hear that? I mean, I heard craniums actually exploding. Oh, my God. They're leaping to the defense of this a guy who clearly was cheating on his wife with a coworker, and it has relevance because when you're put over a barrel in something like that, people have leverage against you. But did you hear them? All of them. And then, I mean, Cicilline, this ass clown from Rhode Island. Rhode Island elected this guy, so unfortunately they're getting everything they deserved, and that's too bad because there are some really good people. But Representative Gohmert said, I think, what a lot of Americans wanted to say to Agent Strzok, which is that you're a coward, you're a disgrace, you've destroyed the reputation of the FBI, you've brought this agency that you come here to represent with pride, you've brought them down to a level that I don't think any of us thought possible. And my question is always the same. Given what we know, how much do we not know? If this guy can be caught injecting insane amounts of personal bias into an investigation and lie about it on TV in front of and have elected officials defend him, what does that tell you? What does that tell you about where this country is? My favorite part, the part I got to catch 100% of, was the exchange between Trey Gowdy, who I've been wondering about for well over a year, where he's been, where this dog's been hunting. And it appears to me that yesterday he was hunting on Agent Strzok's property, because listen to this exchange about Trey Gowdy basically saying, shut up, I don't care, answer my damn question.
Here's what I want to know. Who's the he and he's not?
He is then candidate Trump.
So when you said no, Donald Trump's not, in connection with the question going to become president, what's the it?
Chairman
We'll
Gowdy,
stop it.
Chairman Gowdy, that text needs to be taken in the context of
I'm asking, look, if you want to have a debate over a two-letter word, we're going to have to do that some other time. What and who did you mean by it?
Mr. Gowdy, as I've stated, that text was written late at night in shorthand.
I don't care when it was written. I don't care whether it was longhand, cursive. I don't care about any of that. I want to know what it meant, Agent Strzok.
It would be his candidacy for the presidency, and my sense that the American population would not vote him into office.
Right. Well, we hadn't gotten to the will yet.
Well, I'm trying to cut to the chase and explain the text.
The will is the American people. Is that right? That's your testimony. The will stop it. You were speaking on behalf of the American people. Is that correct?
Mr. Gowdy, what my testimony is, and what I said during extensive asking of this question during my prior interview, is I don't recall writing that text.
Are you denying writing the text?
What I can tell you is that text in no way suggested that I or the FBI would take any action to influence the candidacy of
Agent Strzok. That is a fantastic answer to a question nobody asked.
A fantastic answer to a question nobody asked. The reason I'm laughing is because I love to see bullies. I love to see people who think they're above the law get their asses handed to them, and that's exactly what happened. This is every bit the same as watching Hillary Clinton get undressed and I apologize for that visual, getting called out for their crimes. This guy committed treason. He tried to rig and helped to try and rig a presidential election with Fusion GPS and the FBI and all the other things that we've learned since then. In the year and a half that this Mueller farce has been going on, the only thing we've actually found out factual is that the DNC, Clinton campaign, the Obama administration, the FBI, and the DOJ colluded and conspired to rig a presidential election. And the great thing is they couldn't have failed more epically. And watching them getting their comeuppance is enjoyable. This is the Scud Farkas getting his ass kicked moment, and I love it. I want you finally to listen to someone who I've had on the show and someone we'll have back, a man who I've come to very much trust and enjoy, because I feel like he has done and worked as hard as he can work for us. He's part of the Freedom Caucus. Listen to Representative Jim Jordan talk to Agent Strzok, and listen to the former FBI, disgraced FBI agent, try and make sense out of this, and when he can't.
You got an email that you sent. It should be presented there, or should be in front of you there. I want you to take a look at this. This is an email you wrote to Lisa Page, Bill Priestap, Jim Baker, Jim Rubicki, and CC'd Andy McCabe. Subject line is BuzzFeed's about to publish the dossier. You familiar with this email?
I am.
All right. Says this: comparing now, the set is only identical to what McCain had. Parentheses, it has differences from what was given to us by Korn and Simpson. Did you write all that?
So obviously
wait,
you have
look at that. Do you see the from?
So Congressman, here's
do you see the from line? Do you see the from line?
Congressman, I do.
It says
and I
Peter
understand
Strzok. And then it says to Lisa Page and a whole bunch of other key people at the FBI. So did you write it?
I did write this.
All right, let me ask you a couple questions about it. It has differences from what was given to us by Korn and Simpson. Who's Korn?
Sir, to answer that question, and I would love to answer that question, and every part of me, and you know why I'd want to answer that question, because you have this information.
Who's Simpson?
I have been, sir, if I may. I cannot answer that question.
You wrote about it. It's now public. Who's Korn? Who's Simpson?
Based on direction by the FBI, sir, I am not able to answer questions about ongoing investigative matters.
I just want to figure this out. Agent Strzok. You're referencing 3 copies of the dossier. The BuzzFeed copy you have, the one John McCain's staff gave to you, and the one that you said you got from Corn and Simpson. The one McCain gave to you and the one BuzzFeed has are identical in your words, but they have the Corn and Simpson one is different.
Sir,
this is kind of important.
It is important, and I want to answer your question. And here's the position that I'm in, Congressman. I have been directed. May I answer your question?
Mr. Chairman, may the witness be permitted
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Jordan repeatedly asks a question, doesn't let him answer it.
The gentleman from Ohio controls the time.
Wow. The thing that's, in addition to seeing these people getting what they deserve, the thought that these people actually think that they're pulling one over on us is insulting. The thought that they can sit there and lie. Listen, let's be very clear about something. These people are supposed to be the cream of the crop of our intelligence service. They're so awesome at their jobs that they didn't. A couple things you have to take away from these emails. One, these emails were sent under the premise that they would never, ever, ever be made public. And the only possible way that they're not going to get caught and be made public is if Hillary Clinton's president. That's point number one. These people were all doing all of these things. They were doing them in concert with each other, knowing full well that they were above the law. He admits to 3 different copies of the document when he was told that they had never received a copy of the document at this point. I mean, it's just mind-boggling, and it's going to be, I think, one of the most controversial congressional hearings of our lifetime, even though nothing got accomplished. But the amount of information that came out yesterday proves that we knew what we all knew from the beginning, which is that they tried to rig it and they failed. So we're going to take a short break. On the other side of the break will be Breitbart London's Oliver Lane. We're going to talk about President Trump's visit to the UK and all the things going on and the fact that he continues to now call out the British media in addition to the American media. Back in just a minute.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlow.
Jeannie in Pennsylvania.
I think we've gotten away from what we really hired him to do, which is draining the swamp. If you look at the real picture of draining a swamp, you go in and you take all the water out of it. What does it leave? It leaves the gunk. He cannot get rid of the gunk. We have to get rid of the gunk. Everything he's doing, he's lowering the water so we can see who needs to go. The only way they can go is if we vote them out.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on SiriusXM Patriot 125.
You're listening to the Curt Schilling Podcast. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Joining me now is a gentleman who is right in the thick of things as I watch this press conference out of the UK with Prime Minister May and President Trump. He is Breitbart London's Oliver Lane. Good morning, Oliver. How are you?
Good morning. Very well. How are we?
Well, you know what? I talked to James Dellingpole yesterday, and I'm coming to believe that the American media is not covering a lot of things that we would be interested in hearing over here. I'm getting a chance to see the press conference with Prime Minister May. It doesn't sound to me like the story the American media has been reporting to us. But I'm wondering over there, I don't care about the British media. I care about you, the British citizen, and your other fellow British. What's the public takeaway right now? What's the attitude and atmosphere like on the streets over there?
Well, I think one of the most important pieces of research to come out in the past few days was actually yesterday, a new poll by YouGov, which showed us that 50% of Brits polled supported President Trump's visit to London, and just, I think, 37% against, so obviously 13% also abstaining. But I think this shows us that no matter how big this long-promised, much-talked-up protest that we're expecting in London today, no matter how big that's going to be, no matter how many people turn up, it seems represent a minority position, because those people who are out on the street, they're not necessarily out because they don't think very highly of President Trump. Plenty of people in the UK don't. They're not out there because they oppose his policies. Plenty of people in the UK do. That's fine, and that's the God-given right of every person to have their own opinion. But what they are in favour of, just like London Mayor Sadiq Khan, who has on a number of occasions said that the visit to London and the United Kingdom should be cancelled, those people who have actually taken the time on one of the hottest days of the year when they could be out with their family and friends having a barbecue, going to the pub, instead they're out with the placards waving, protesting, because they don't want the President of the United States to even have the right, the ability to come to the United Kingdom. They think the invitation should have been withdrawn. And, that poll, that research, I think that shows that is a minority position.
Well, and that's a powerful message. So the poll says 50% of British citizens are in favor of Trump's visit, which we've been led to believe that every person taking a breath on the European continent and the island of Great Britain hates President Trump, and we know that's not true. It's not true here, and it's not true there. As I watched him and the Prime Minister walk away, a lot of what I heard coming from her flies in the face of what the liberal media is telling us about these meetings. She talked about Brexit and about how all of the promises of Brexit are going to be kept, the important ones. The fact that the UK will no longer be run from some puppet court in Belgium, I think is not a small thing. I guess what I'm wondering, is there more dislike and dismay around Prime Minister May than there is Trump? Because I'm hearing from people that they're incredibly fearful of the fact that she's trying to renege on the entire deal.
Indeed, and if what Prime Minister May said in the press conference today is true, it's great news. But it actually does directly contradict the deal, the white paper she put forward at Chequers on Friday last week. So 1 week ago, when the great event happened, which caused the semi-collapse of her cabinet, of her government. We saw Boris Johnson withdraw. We saw David Davis withdraw from her government because the deal she was putting forward was no Brexit at all. So there are some contradictions in her position, it seems. I do hope and I do pray that Donald Trump has actually inspired Theresa May to go further and harder with Brexit. We've seen these remarks from the president at the press conference. It was happening just before I came on the show. I don't know if it's still happening now, saying that he has given advice to Theresa May about the best way to pursue Brexit, and that it may have been too much and too far for her, a so-called brutal option yet, but hopefully it's something we're going to come round to, because there is no doubt the people of the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union. Yes. No ifs, no buts. And the deal as we have it now, as created by Theresa May, is full of ifs and buts. And President Trump, to his total credit, throughout the NATO summit, in his interview with the British press last night, in his visit today, has repeatedly dropped hints, it seems to me, that he knows that the British people aren't yet getting what they voted for, and it seems to be something that he has sympathy with.
Well, and that is not a small point when the president of another country feels to be more in your corner than the president of your own country. That's got to be troublesome and disturbing in many ways for the people of the UK who did speak. There was no gray area. There was absolutely no nebulous, challenging to interpret part of this. They won out. And anybody with half a lick of sense understands why they want out and why other countries in the EU should want out and why the EU itself, that whole thing is a disaster. And we're watching countries like Italy and others literally get ready to head into bankruptcy because of what the EU has done to their economic system. I always find it fascinating to talk to people on your side of the pond, Oliver, about what's interesting them. I'm wondering how much coverage the hearing got yesterday over there from over here. Peter Strzok and the FBI, colluding with the DNC and the Obama administration and the Clinton campaign to rig a presidential election. He was on front and center, and I'm wondering how much play that got over there yesterday.
Well, it's an interesting one because we do see a lot of reportage of American politics in the UK press, especially in places like France and Germany as well. And the newspapers have been giving pretty exhaustive front page coverage to previous hearings going back the past few months. I think because of where it's landed in the UK-Europe news cycle, we had President Trump in Brussels for NATO today and yesterday in the United Kingdom for his working visit, and then heading to Scotland tonight, and then Russia after that. I think that is occupying all those top spaces in stories right now. So that really hasn't got anything remotely approaching the level of coverage here that it will have on your side of the pond, no doubt.
I want to ask you something, Oliver. I'm always curious about something that the UK has that we don't, and that's the royal family. I've come to understand over the last 40, 50, 60 years how much lessened the influence the royal family has. I'm wondering if there is any opportunity afforded them or any piece or part of this where the royal family interjects or is part of something like this. Do they even matter, or are they just completely now for show?
It's an interesting question, and there are really two levels. The very simple one is that, yes, they are just for show, and they have no direct input into British politics. There is a slightly more nuanced answer, of course, which is that Her Majesty the Queen has seen and been monarch to every British Prime Minister since the Second World War, including Winston Churchill. And she has been a confidant to those prime ministers in a way that really nobody else can be. And that is because the monarch, Her Majesty the Queen, has a very sort of special place in our constitutional settlement. And because the politicians of the day, be it the Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the Ministers of State, they all are the Queen's government. They are the Her Majesty's government. So they are obliged, the Prime Minister specifically, to visit the Queen regularly and give her updates on what's happening. Now, what happens in these meetings is totally secret. It is totally off the record.
Well, because and let me interrupt you real quick, Oliver. And that is because, as I understand it, obviously as someone who's in love with World War II history and trying to understand it, their job is much more being the face of the UK as opposed to being the voice of the UK. And they're supposed to be neutral, aren't they? I mean, they're supposed to appear to be neutral.
Yes, they are supposed to appear to be neutral, and they are. And that's a long-standing convention the United Kingdom has had since the English Civil War and the restoration of Charles II in 1666, I believe. But the point is, they have these secret meetings with the Prime Minister. The Queen has had so many prime ministers now. She has this enormous wealth of experience and knowledge of British politics and how it works that really nobody else in politics has. So the understanding is, and several former prime ministers have said that they valued her opinions and her advice so much because she is so experienced and so worldly and so wise. So it is possible, I understand, that if there is a particularly major issue that a politician may be struggling with, they can go to the monarch and say, actually, I don't know where to take this. What would Winston Churchill have done? And that's a very valuable thing to have.
It seems like it would be a waste to not tap into that resource, given her. And I got to tell you, I know a lot of it is because of her age and her. She seems like such a calming force. Obviously behind the scenes, they wield a little bit more power than probably many would like. But she does seem to be someone who it would be very hard for her to overreact. But there's also corners of the world that believe she's part of a larger cabal of people that want the European Union to be the new world order.
Yes, I've heard that. And honestly, I've never seen any evidence of it. You may cast your mind back to the time of the Brexit referendum. When a British tabloid newspaper splashed that the Queen backs Brexit. Now, that went against British protocol to claim any political position on behalf of the monarch, and it was never confirmed by the palace. But you have to assume that for them to have the confidence to publish that headline, that it might have been based on something. As it is, we can't possibly know. And it is true there is a new, younger generation of royals coming in. Prince Harry, who I believe is now 6th in line to the throne, so his importance is diminishing with time. He's obviously been very close to Barack Obama, because of their mutual work together. So there is that element. But I think it's very clear that Her Majesty the Queen has done a incredible job of remaining politically neutral over her very long reign, more so than many other monarchs that came before her.
Yeah, I got to tell you, that's one of the things. I'll use a sports analogy on this side that may lose its impact on you, but for Derek Jeter to have played 2 decades in New York and not created a media stir is an amazing thing. And I agree with you on her situation. For her to have never been the centerpiece of a story when it comes to policy is impressive, considering the position she sits in and the position that family sits in as it relates to the outside world looking at the UK. One last question. I'm quarterbacking from across the ocean, but I think Sadiq Khan has been an absolute shame for the people of London. I see the rise in violence. I see him trying to try and pass knife legislation and gun legislation. I mean, it's already next to impossible to own a firearm as a private citizen. I'm wondering, how in the world does a man like that, first off, get elected in a country like yours? And given that it feels to me like he stands against just about everything you guys could be for as a populist. And I'm not talking about Islamophobia and any of the other things. I'm talking about the fact that this man is looking to make the UK a giant melting pot of people that no one knows who's where.
Well, it's worth remembering that, generally speaking, British politics is significantly to the left of United States politics. Even Britain's most right-wing political figures, the most conservative, the most pro-border control, etc., people in the United Kingdom really are far to the left of, your average Republican in the United States. So there is that great chasm, as it were, between us in terms of political norms. So if you look at Sadiq Khan and think, wow, how in the world did somebody that appallingly left-wing ever get elected in a Western democracy? You've got to bear in mind that there's that difference. And there are other factors at work. So we've got to bear in mind that London flipped from Boris Johnson, who was the previous mayor, to Sadiq Khan in one go. That is at least in part to demographic change in London. The city of London, not the city of London, but Greater London is increasingly left wing, and that's a trend I don't think is going to end. Not least because those who may be more likely to vote Conservative or vote right wing are moving out of London, moving into the countryside surrounding the city, commuting into work or even working from home. So those small changes kind of change very fundamentally the way the political dynamics of a city works.
I don't see that as a small thing, especially looking at it from over here. I always kind of looked at London as kind of a, yes, I get that it's liberal because it's European, and I never felt it would go the way I feel now, which is what you just said, is much more radically far left than we know, or we think, or we feel. And that to me is, I don't see that being a good thing for anybody.
Sure, and there is a strong element of identity politics of it as well. I mean, Sadiq Khan, very clearly puts himself across as the candidate for minorities. Is always playing up his heritage. And that has worked well for him as well. In London, a city, of course, we have to remember, which since 2011 has been minority white British. Right. And is being followed in that by other British cities as well, as mass migration sort of very fundamentally changes the demographics of our nation.
Hey, Oliver, listen, always a pleasure. I look forward to catching up again.
Have a great show.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
A lot of people not knowing what action they could or should take to make the difference. What I do is try to turn people on to sites like Breitbart, people who are writing and publishing the truth so that people will get educated. But, you kind of can't blame productive members of society who are kind of confused, perplexed as to what do we do to take this government back.
Sirius XM Patriot, Channel 125.
We want to hear from you. Tweet the show at Garrick38. Once again, here's Curt Schilling.
Welcome back, guys. Joining me now as he has often Breitbart's own John Nolte, who's got his finger on the pulse of what feels like everything. Good morning, John. How are you, buddy?
I'm good, Curt. Good to talk to you. Happy Friday.
To you, too. Last week I talked to you. You had just put out a list of, I think at the time it was 112 acts of media-approved violence and harassment. And one of the mandates coming out of the show was, hey, listen, if you've heard of an event or you've seen an event, please report it to us. Here we are 7 days later, and that list is now at 415. And we can mock and laugh at the severity of some of these things if you want, but the fact of the matter is, we're talking about events that in some cases have put people's lives in danger. In other situations have been people who have reached out to attempt to murder people on the right. I can't get over the fact that as I read through these, there's no way the media can keep up with them, number one, which is, I think, a tactic of theirs, just to kind of swarm, overwhelm in many ways. But this thing is growing, and the things that are being added and the things that I didn't know about are beyond disturbing. I mean, Sarah Huckabee Sanders sucked up an entire news cycle by having the people at the Red Hen treat her like less than a person. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. And I'm wondering if you can if there's some of these that have jumped out at you that maybe people don't know that people should be aware of, because this is becoming, obviously, if you look at the dates, it's every day.
Yeah, we're talking about 415. And I'm probably at the 60% point. I mean, my guess is that by the time I'm done, we're going to be in the 700 range, because I'm really only concentrating over. I mean, I have lists and lists and lists of stuff that you just would not believe, and they're so long, they're so daunting that the idea of sitting down and doing it at one time, it would be impossible. I'd go crazy. Right. So I'm doing about 40, 50 a day, and just going back and making sure I'm not doubling anything. Right. And
you're actually doing a reporter's job. You're fact-checking for facts instead of
right. I'm doing the due diligence. I'm making, right. Some people are sending me stuff where a lot of people send me stuff, and I'm not complaining. Don't misunderstand me. It's just an example about Robert De Niro mouthing off to Trump. Well, that's just language. No matter how nasty it is, it's just language. But it's so this is all stuff that's everything from murder to property damage, or attempted murder to property damage. And you can see it, every time I do this, and I see how much I have left when I'm done after working on it for 2 or 3 hours, I'm always reminded of how insane CNN went for a week because a rodeo clown nobody ever heard of in Texas wore a Barack Obama mask.
Yes. That's such a great example, John. I remember the news cycle it was literally a week around the whole rodeo clown Obama thing. And you've got things like Kellyanne Conway being harassed in a grocery store, the DHS office being vandalized by anti-Trump people, a Florida man being attacked in his yard over a Trump flag, Stephen Miller being – I mean, the list goes on. And you're dismissing things that are far more vindictive and mean and violent potentially than the rodeo clown incident, which, again, sucked the oxygen out of the news cycle for 7 days because someone read something offensive where there actually wasn't anything offensive.
Yeah, it was just disrespect. It was some nobody in Texas disrespecting Barack Obama, satirizing him, even though this guy in the past had worn a George W. Bush mask. And now you have, and not just against Trump officials, but you have this, I'm just awed by the amount of property damage that was done, especially around the election. If people go to look at the list, they'll see that in the August, September, October 26 area, unbelievable amounts of property damage done to Trump supporters. The vandalism, their signs were lit on fire, swastikas painted on their house, just signs stolen and stolen and stolen. And everything I'm using here, I'm using a mainstream media source. I get a lot of people sending me emails about their personal experiences, and I can't help them because it's not that I don't believe them, but I need to make sure that there's a source here. And this is where the media is going to say, well, see, we covered it because you're using mainstream media sources.
Yep.
But that, of course, is nonsense. That's dutiful coverage. That's okay. We're on record. We covered it. But there is an epidemic of violence, property damage, harassment, menacing that has been going on now for 2.5 years against Trump and his supporters, and the media is just dutifully covering it. Okay, here's the story. But the same media that lost its mind over a rodeo clown for a week is not at all concerned about informing the general public or shaming the general public or shaming the left from stopping this unbelievable epidemic of violence and bullying. It's unbelievable. I did not expect it to grow like this. I'm shocked.
As someone who's at the kind of the heart of the maelstrom, which I believe we are here at Breitbart, one only has to look at the level of vitriol and anger the left puts up against us. But do you believe in lying by omission?
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely.
And I say that because what you just said is so true. The fact of the matter is that in many ways it feels, and I don't want to discredit or to disrespect the members of our military, but this feels very much like the war in the Middle East. When it stopped getting votes, when it stopped being able to raise campaign money on it, it went to page A15. A lot of these stories you're talking about, yeah, they were reported on, but they were right next to the obits in Section C of the newspaper, and no one ever saw the article. And I believe there is a wanton and willful attempt to, and I'm using air quotes, cover the story for the sake of covering your ass, but not actually covering the story as it relates to the size and scope of what it actually should be.
And a perfect example of that is Antifa. I mean, Antifa is a left-wing terrorist group running around wearing masks, trying to foment riots all around the country. And they're not just doing it to the alt-right. And as awful as the alt-right is, if they are protesting whatever hideous thing they're protesting legally and peacefully, they should be left alone because you have a right to be an asshole in America. But the Antifa also goes after everyday conservatives, everyday Trump supporters, and they are a left-wing terrorist group. And just try to imagine if a right-wing terrorist group was putting masks on and wearing black and creating riots at Democrat gatherings. I mean, the media that's why I consider all of this violence, especially Antifa, the lies of omission, the covering it up, the just dutiful coverage and then ignoring it. We have a campaign of political violence in this country going on, and the media is totally responsible for it. And I consider all of this violence nothing less than the media's brown shirts. They are encouraging this violence.
Yes.
They are supporting this violence. Yes. They're doing it proactively, and they're doing it by lying through omission. And this is just the media's brown shirts going out there hundreds and hundreds of times, attacking, menacing, vandalizing, trying to murder people that the media hate, those of us on the right.
I am so tired of the left's ignorance of history, both here and abroad. Their use of Nazi and Hitler and brown shirts and SS and all the things that they do in trying to draw some sort of parallel to the right is so ignorant of actual factual history. I mean, the irony of all ironies for me, Johnny, you and I have talked about this. Antifa is a group calling themselves anti-fascists, made up 100% of people who are fascist. I mean, only in America can that happen. And the media buys into it. Not only do I agree with you in that they support it, I believe in many, many cases they're intentionally perpetuating it. And then they're making Antifa out to be, well, a lot like Black Lives Matter, which turned out to basically be a group of terrorists. It was a group founded on a lie that no statistic known to man would support, yet it grew into this thing that was, part of it was the assassination of 5 police officers in Dallas. I mean, that's brown shirt stuff. When you talk about brown shirts, we're not talking about khaki dress. We're talking about true, at its core, evil. And that's what these people and who these people are. And they are running around calling everybody else Nazis.
Right, and they know what they're doing. I mean, this is...
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, this is not historical ignorance. This is an intentional propaganda campaign led by, and because the Democrats are no good at this anymore, it is led by the media. It is led by CNN. It is led by the Washington Post. It is led by the New York Times. Time and time again, justifying this violence by calling us Nazis, advocating for violence by saying that we're running concentration camps. I mean, how are you supposed to react if there's a Nazi in your midst? I mean, of course you're going to be violent. How are you supposed to react if people are running concentration camps, even though that concentration camp is just a continuation of Obama's policy of separating kids at the border.
And
that is a call to violence by calling us racist, by saying that Trump's a racist and he's a Nazi. That is a call to violence. And that's exactly what the media is doing. And that's why they look the other way. Oh, they'll dutifully cover it. They'll pop a story up on it. They'll, it'll be at the, at the 22-minute mark in the CNN hour as they move over it. But that's why they're turning the other way. They want this violence out there. They think it helps them, and they're perpetuating it, and they constantly rationalize it and justify it. And things are so bad now, they're willing to do that in writing. Talk about how sometimes it's justified when it's not. So it's a very scary time for Trump supporters. And hopefully this list, as it grows and it gets more comprehensive, and I want people to go over it, and I want them to email me if I made a mistake, because I want it to be pure. But hopefully people will look at this and they'll understand exactly what's going on out there. And never forget that the same people committing this violence and the same people in the media justifying and fomenting this violence are the same people that want to disarm us. And there's a reason for that, because these are violent people. They're bullies. And if we are disarmed, imagine what they'll do to us. Look at what they're doing now, but imagine what they'll do to us if we're disarmed.
I got to tell you, one of the things that has resonated with me is this call to disarm from a group of violent people. But even getting back to what you were talking about, the concentration camp narrative, the fact that these people can put up pictures of first of all, they were Obama-era pictures, but that doesn't really matter, of the border with these young illegal immigrants who are separated from their families. If they can put that picture next to piles of dead Jews, hundreds of bodies piled up outside of the ovens in Auschwitz and Dachau and Birkenau and all over Eastern Europe as the Nazis tried to implement their final solution. That is a lack of common sense and a lack of even any sort of recognition of what history. And the people in Europe were the ones that were subjected to that. And it feels to me like they're perfectly okay heading back in that direction. Maybe they're doing it unwillingly or unknowingly, but I don't believe that I agree with you. I think that they know exactly what they're doing. I just can't. I can't square it with common sense. And that's, I'm watching this protest in London, which is fine. That's great. I love the fact that people can openly in the streets protest their differences or their grievances, and that's how it should be. But there are very few countries in the world where that's allowed to happen. And the fact that, we fail to recognize that we're one of those countries. I've watched liberals tell us the grass is always greener over there for the last 18 months when the things that my president has done over and over and over again, he told us he was going to do on the campaign trail, number one. But number two, he's done it despite the fact that our entire government was against him. And I want to jump to that for this last point. I don't know how much of the hearing you got to see yesterday, John. I was awkwardly uncomfortable for much of it. Number one, because I watched Democrats stand up and try and defend a man who is as treasonous as anybody that I've ever seen. A man who clearly was emailing and texting with impunity because he didn't believe he was ever going to be held accountable, which I think is another conversation altogether. But we now know for a fact that this man was extremely biased in every possible way he could be. And I watched elected Democratic officials in the state. One of them wanted to pin a Purple Heart on this man. I mean, are you kidding me?
Yeah, and these are people that present themselves as liberals. These are people who, Peter Strzok is as dirty of a cop as you can get. This is a dirty, dirty cop.
He's
and
the
just
left
try
Mark
to imagine,
Furman.
take politics out of it, take personalities out of it. You got a guy, you're Donald Trump. Just put yourself in his position, whether you like him or not. You got a very powerful FBI agent investigating you who is sending those tweets. If you were a district attorney or a police officer and you were writing stuff like that about the person you were investigating, the entire case would be thrown out of court. There's no way that you'd be, because you have rights as a human being. You have rights in this country to not be persecuted. And this guy, and not only that, he's so arrogant. He's so full of himself. He sees, and all he was doing yesterday was playing up to Democrats and to the media. What he was doing yesterday in his defiance, even though he had no good answers, even though he is obviously a very dirty cop, he's trying to get a CNN contract. That's what he was doing yesterday. He was just going to be defiant and arrogant and say all this stuff about Trump because he wants the media to like him, because he wants an opportunity to have his own MSNBC show. And in this country now, because the media is so corrupt, that works. You can get away with what he did yesterday. And it was just a remarkable thing to see. But that is one of the most despicable people I've ever come across. And the idea that someone so arrogant and so venomous and so amoral is at that level of the FBI, it kind of makes me want to kiss Glenn Greenwald on the mouth, because that guy was so right about how corrupted our systems are, our total national security and our national police systems are. That guy should have never been a police officer, much less an FBI agent. They should screen lunatics like that out. But he sees himself as some sort of super patriot, James Bond with his mistress on the side, and he's that a cop that dirty could go that high. There's something terribly wrong at the FBI.
Did you have, and I got to close up, but I want to ask you one last question. Did you have Clinton flashbacks when you heard him talk about the fact that he was allowed to pick and choose which texts he submitted for evidence? I found that to be comically terrifying, I guess. He was allowed to, he admitted that he was the person who picked and got to choose which texts he was going to have to submit in the case against him. I mean, come on. Really? You honestly think we're buying that happened without any prejudice or bias?
And that tells you that the system is a huge problem. Because they were trying to protect him, and they were trying to protect themselves. So the system is the problem. It's not just one or two bad and dirty cops. The whole system is bad, and the whole FBI needs a big, big enema. And I'm not really pleased with the guy Trump put in there, because he's too busy protecting them. But there is
I'm with you.
Something seriously wrong there.
Hey, John, I got to go, man. Thank you so much. Look forward to having you back.
All right, anytime. Thank you.
All right, John Nolte from Breitbart.com. My winner and loser are the same thing. They're the same topic. I've heard people complain about the separation of families at the border for people that are crossing the border illegally, complaining about the treatment, which, by the way, for anybody that doesn't know, on average, $35,000 a year in taxpayer money is sent for one child, which puts that child living about $11,000 above the poverty line of an American child in poverty. But they're complaining about all of this. A gentleman who's active on Twitter and is an Iraqi war veteran, J.R. Salzman, basically came back with a tweet yesterday that said it all for me. In response to Carl Zimmer, who said, as migrant families are reunited, some children don't recognize their mothers. And he replied with, F off. My brigade was deployed for 22 months straight thanks to the Iraqi war surge. Guys missed 2 years of their kids' birthdays and bitching about illegal immigrant families being separated for 3 months. Are you serious with this bullshit? Boom. Mic drop. In a nutshell, that's exactly right. Not to mention a lot of what you're being told about the border is a complete lie. It's not happening. It's never happened. So God bless you guys. Have a great weekend. Here's the hoping and praying my president keeps making America great again. Have a great weekend, guys. God bless you.
I want to actually take a couple of the references to Donald Trump from hip-hop. And then we're going to try to see if we can figure out why they like Donald Trump. Jay-Z said, I'm at the Trump International. Ask for me. Raekwon said, I'm the black Trump. They are comparing themselves to what he represents. His wealth, his achievement. Capitalism.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson. Saturday from 1 to 3 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.